the last couple of years I've always been the third guy.
Do you feel like even when Alcaraz comes back that you can keep challenging these two and maybe make it a big three?
I hope so. I think I've been pushing those guys. I haven't beaten them this year, but I've pushed them to limits, I would say. You know, Alcaraz in Australia, Jannik maybe here, even though it was 4 sets. I think it was very close 4 sets. I think that's the goal, and that's what I'm working on my game for. There was always like this conversation, who will be the third guy and the search of the third guy. The last couple of years I've always been the third guy, but I was just far away from those two. But I've always been number 3 in a way. If I get closer to them, if I can be in a mix of course, competing and winning the big tournaments with them, alongside them, that would be great.
Jannik Sinner just won his 2nd straight Wimbledon title. And instead of spending his post-match press conference basking in the moment, he did something far more interesting. He looked past his own trophy, past the 4-hour battle he'd just survived, and said the quiet part out loud. Men's tennis, in his own words, needs Carlos Alcaraz back. Not once, needs. And when the best player on the planet says that after just beating one of the sport's brightest rising stars in a final for the ages, you have to wonder what he's really seeing on the horizon that the rest of us aren't. Let's start with what actually happened on center court, because this wasn't a routine coronation. Sinner had to fight for every single game of this one. Alexander Zverev pushed him through 4 brutal sets, stretching the final to just under 4 hours, and for long stretches it looked like Zverev might actually pull off the upset. The first set alone went to a tiebreak that Zverev snatched, and for a moment, the tennis world held its breath wondering if this was the day the balance of power finally shifted. But Sinner clawed his way back, leveling things in a second-set tiebreak of his own, then grinding out the 3rd and 4th sets to close it out 6-7, 7-6, 6-3, 6-4. When the dust settled, Sinner had done something no man had managed since Roger Federer's dominant run from 2004 through 2007. Back-to-back Wimbledon titles. His 5th Grand Slam trophy overall. Another line added to a resume that's starting to look historic. And yet, in the moments right after the win, Sinner wasn't talking like a man who just cemented his place at the top of the sport. He was talking like someone who understood exactly how fragile that position could be without the right competition pushing him. He didn't hold back on praising Zverev either, acknowledging how much the German's game has evolved and calling the growth genuinely impressive. But then he added something telling, something that reframed the entire moment. He said competition like that is exactly what the sport needs, because having someone constantly pushing you to your limit is what keeps you sharp. That's when the conversation shifted to the player who wasn't even on the grounds. Carlos Alcaraz has been absent from the tour since April, sidelined by a wrist injury he picked up during the Barcelona Open. For a sport that had spent the better part of 2 years being defined by the Sinner-Alcaraz rivalry, his absence has left a noticeable gap, and Sinner made sure everyone knew he felt it too. He expressed hope that Alcaraz would make his way back to the tour soon, framing it not as a personal wish but as something the entire sport is missing right now. He pointed to Novak Djokovic still competing, a wave of hungry young players emerging behind them, and said all of it together is what makes the men's game so compelling. But the subtext was clear. Without Alcaraz, something is missing from that picture. To understand why Sinner would say something like that after winning, you have to look at just how dominant he and Alcaraz have been together. Before Zverev broke through and won his first major title at Roland Garros earlier this year, Sinner and Alcaraz had combined to win 9 straight Grand Slam tournaments between them. 9. That's not a rivalry. That's a duopoly, 2 players so far ahead of the field that everyone else was essentially playing for 3rd place. So when Zverev finally cracked that code in Paris, it wasn't just a breakthrough for him individually, it represented the first real crack in a wall that had felt unbreakable for 2 full years. Which makes Sinner's path to this Wimbledon title even more compelling, because it wasn't a smooth one. Just weeks before arriving in London, Sinner suffered one of the more stunning defeats of his career at the French Open, blowing a 2-set lead against Juan Manuel Cerundolo and crashing out in the 2nd round. For a player of his caliber, that kind of loss doesn't just sting, it lingers. It raises questions. It gives doubters ammunition. So when Sinner finally got his hands back on the Wimbledon trophy, he didn't try to downplay how much that turnaround meant to him. He admitted this title carried extra weight specifically because of how difficult things had been in Paris just weeks earlier. Now brings Zverev back into the picture, Because his side of this story matters just as much. This wasn't some fluky run to a final. Zverev arrived at Wimbledon fresh off winning his first career Grand Slam title in Paris, and instead of that title being a peak, it looks increasingly like a launching pad. Reaching the Wimbledon final on a completely different surface, against the best grass court player in the world, just weeks after breaking through on clay, is the kind of versatility that tells you a player has genuinely leveled up. Sinner clearly saw it too, and rather than just offering a generic post-match handshake compliment, he took the time to speak directly to what Zverev has built. He acknowledged how close Zverev had come to winning Wimbledon itself, and told him that if he keeps playing at this level, a title on that court is coming his way eventually. Then Sinner said something even more pointed, something that wasn't really about Wimbledon at all. He brought up the #1 ranking, telling Zverev he knows becoming the top player in the world is one of his goals, and that he's getting close enough that everyone at the top now needs to take that seriously. Think about what that actually means coming from the man who just beat him in a Grand Slam final. That's not politeness. That's Sinner, arguably the most locked-in competitor in the sport right now, acknowledging out loud that the hierarchy of men's tennis is shifting beneath his feet, and that Zverev isn't just a name filling out a bracket anymore. He's a legitimate threat to the throne. So here's where all of this leaves men's tennis heading into the second half of the season. Sinner sits at the top with 5 majors and the look of a player entering his prime. Zverev has finally broken through with a major title of his own and just proved he can compete at the very highest level on multiple surfaces. Djokovic remains a threat every time he steps on court, refusing to fully hand over the torch. And then there's Alcaraz, sidelined, recovering, and by Sinner's own admission, deeply missed. The sport has genuine depth again for the first time in years, real competition at the top instead of a two-man race. And yet the man who just won it all is telling you the picture still isn't complete without one more piece falling back into place. That's the real story here. Not just another Sinner trophy, not just Zverev's continued rise, but a subtle acknowledgement from the very top of the sport that men's tennis is entering a new era, one shaped by more contenders than it had in years, and one that still won't feel fully whole until Carlos Alcaraz walks back onto a tour that clearly hasn't stopped waiting for him.